What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Rollup. Today's live stream is stacked with a bunch of super cool peeps talking about modular interoperability and how we are going to reach the end game with the various different ideas that each of these guys and girls are building. So we're going to start with some brief intros and then jump right into the conversation. So let's start with Carol, Lane, and then J. Cole, and then we'll finish them off.
Thanks, Andy. Happy to be here. I'm Karel, systems engineer by background and founder of Union. We're a permissionless and trustless CK interoperability protocol that's fully IBC compatible right now in audit and hopefully live end of Q2.
Cool. I'm Lane. I'm one of the founders of Connext. We have been building infrastructure for interoperability since 2020. And yeah, it's got some exciting stuff on the roadmap, but yeah.
I'm John, the founder at Hyperlane. Hyperlane, if you've heard about it, is an open framework for interoperability, focusing a ton on the modular ecosystem and connecting the new snoot of rollups and chains. Going on year 6 in crypto professionally and feeling increasingly old by the day.
And then we have Hart and Philip as well.
Hey guys, I'm Hart. I'm one of the founders of Across. We are a cross-chain bridge that's focused on an intent-based architecture, which I'm sure we're going to talk about too.
Hey, awesome. I'm Philip, one of the co-founders of LeFi. We are a multi-chain trading API, essentially aggregating and abstracting away anything that moves or swaps assets, DEX aggregators, bridges, the people that are here in this call. All of that is aggregated. And as such, we serve like MetaMask, Phantom, and other large wallets and trading apps.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody.
I want to start us off, just get right into it. Like, I want to know, like, when we ultimately achieve interoperability, like, is there an end goal? Like, we've achieved it. If so, what does that look like? Or is this like a never-ending road? What do you guys think? Anyone that's open for anyone, just up for grabs? Yeah.
It's not a never-ending road, right? Like there is an end. The end is you don't care what, like you don't know where the hosting environment is. The same way that like we don't know which like AWS enclave this live stream is being hosted on. Like we have no idea. No one here is going to investigate that. No one who's viewing is going to care to investigate that. And so think of like what people talk about with account abstraction in like a single chain context. There's no reason why that shouldn't be extrapolated into an interchain context. Like, where you're not going to end up with 6 digits worth of different chains and rollups, but people having to know and keep track of, well, where am I right now? Do I have the right token to pay for this computational unit that I'm about to exert? I think that is like the conceptual end game, and I'm sure people have different views too.
John, I don't have a different view. I like that, but I've got maybe a slightly different take. So I like the analogy of like, you don't know if the website you're going to is hosted by AWS or like Google Cloud. Like that makes sense to me. But I do wonder at times if the right analogy might be more like which bank you pick. So US dollars are supposed to be pervasive and a US dollar is the same wherever they are. But that's also kind of not true, right? Like your US dollar at the Federal Reserve is one thing. Your US dollar at JP Morgan is another thing. Your US dollar at Silicon Valley Bank is yet a different thing. And sometimes I wonder if this vision for seamless interop is actually more like the US dollar system, where you mostly don't care. It's mostly the same, but every so often you actually really do care. Yeah.
That's probably more accurate. That's probably much more accurate because there is because of the security implications. So unless those are figured out, now we have like 2 levers for figuring that out. Then there's one of like, okay, so we could have a totally, call it like IBC, like trustless transfer. But hey, if the chain that you're going to or from sucks, you're still in trouble. And so the bank level, I think that's the Bank of the Pacific basically defaulting.
But there are two different views here, right? Like the one perspective is the consumer perspective, and for the consumer perspective, like the maximum amount of fragmentation that person should encounter is the one that Hart stated here, right? My dollar at bank A is different than my dollar at bank B. So this is like the maximum of fragmentation I would say a consumer should encounter. Another question would be like, how fragmented are these solutions on a technological standard? Like, will we have a future where we all agree on a certain communication standard like TCP/IP or HTTPS, I mean, there are different solutions there as well. Like there's Quick broadly and other like compression algorithms and other protocols that allow for cheaper and faster transfers. But those are all just new standards to the very same thing, and no consumer would ever care. Or do you see a future where we have many different interoperability standards driven by multi-chain assets norms, like OFTs from layer 0, for example? And that, I'm curious how you see that, especially, I think Hyperlane, like it's a very modular system, right? When it comes to verification mechanisms, similar to what layer 0 is doing soon as well. And then Union, you probably have very a unique perspective on this as well. So I'm super curious about that one.
Yeah, we kind of take a stance here where we don't really do like pick your security level. I very much think like do everything SSL. Don't think like this website requires no security, this is the highest level. Just do everything over the highest that you can possibly do. As it turns out, like computationally, that's cheaper or just as expensive as multiple levels if you do lifetime based and ZK based. Going back to like what I see for like the interop end state and future at least, if you see it from the user's perspective, yeah, maybe you choose between like 5 different banks and you want to allow transfers there. But for us, it's really about like make sure that developers can choose to build their app-specific L2s, their app chains, and provide the same UX when they combine them as they do in a monolithic stack, right? Like the real objective is make asynchronous composability as good as synchronous in the end. I think with DYDX, saw how well they went for their new product, right? And the UX that they can provide, and also the value that they managed to extract by not paying L1 gas fees over all of their users. And then with like the rise of Celestia and I think like shared settlement and execution proofs, we also removed that whole issue of perhaps one bank being shitty, right? So the future of Interop, to me at least, is like everything is just as secure as everything else because there's shared security and execution proof. Ordering is completely deterministic. And then hopefully we have some Interop standards to connect all of that.
Very cool. So you guys are thinking of different chains as different banks here, and almost like the infrastructure to connect these banks is the interoperability between these chains. Is that the right illustration?
I don't like. I think the difference here. So I like the analogy of saying we're trying to make TCP for blockchains, but I do think the nuance here is in TCP and like on the internet we're moving messages, we're moving bits, right? We're not moving money. And when you're moving money, I'm not sure it's quite the same. Like this is what, you know, I'm still trying to figure out and what we're all discussing. But when you're moving money, your trust assumptions on how that money is moved might be different. And there might just be different strategies for how that works, in the same way that like moving money over Venmo works very differently. Venmo being US centric, we'll have like non-US users here, but it's like a fintech app, private company that sends money. Moving money over Venmo is very different than moving money over like the US Fedwire or like Swift network or something like that. And yeah.
Do you think that choice will be like surfaced to the users in a way where they'll have like the autonomy and information to make an accurate choice there?
I mean, hell no. Like users don't want to deal with that, right? In the same way that you go to your bank and you think it's just your bank and you got your US dollars there, right? So yeah. I'm only pointing out that like I think we can all agree that it will look completely seamless to the user most of the time. And I think that like is the goal, but I'm just not like, again, this is where, you know, there hasn't been a standard like TCP for moving US dollars because there is different kind of trust assumptions amongst how you move dollars between in different ways. And I am maybe optimistic that it can be different when we have like ZK proofs and all this like cool tech. Maybe we actually can have a standard that looks more like TCP for interop, but it's just because the kind of the risks are higher. I'm not sure the path there is like nearly as obvious as it was with the internet.
Yeah,
I
I think one of the nuances from your point that might like have gotten a little lost is that maybe it's something whenever Hart and I sit down for a talk, it always seems to come up like something about people who traded bonds. Like with the bank part, it works very well. Start saying most of the time, and that most might be like 5 nines worth of the time, and in some different paradigm, it might be like 97% of the time. Doesn't really matter, but like every so often, as we've seen, starting with March of last year, very recently, again, with like US Bancorp, these things don't become as obvious in the blockchain context. It's like, well, there's nothing that you could do ultimately to ensure that something like a 51 attack or something that makes the fundamental substrate of where your money is at insecure. And so like, hey, your bank has a collateral ratio, and if they don't know how to manage their deposits and how much they're lending out, they can get in trouble. Similarly, like the chains that you're connecting might get in trouble every so often due to things that are or outside of their control. And that's why I really I've never thought about this bank point, but I'm going to use it more and more now. I really like it because it is like, it's most of the time, that I don't think it can become all of the time, unless everyone agrees to use exactly the same architecture. And I think, so many years into this crypto experiment, we have enough evidence to know like that's just not going to happen. People like being able to do their own thing, and someone's always going to be incentivized to do something different. And that's what led to the explosion in certainly new L1s, but also like new VMs.
Yeah, I think those dynamics actually contribute a lot more to being uncertain about what the end game looks like. But like everybody here is very certain about like what it should feel like.
Yeah, and Lane, on that point, right, the stuff that I think we'd all agree with is like most of the time you want to click a button, right? And your action, whatever you wanted to do on some blockchain happens, and you don't even know what blockchain it happened on. It just happened, right? And most of the time you don't want to know or care whether you have funds on all these different chains or funds in one place. Like you just want it to look like one set of funds, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe I'd actually ask you all too, do you think from like a kind of market structure perspective, do you all imagine that users mostly have like one, I'll call it home chain, where their assets live, and when they're using other blockchains, they're spending money out of that home chain and actions are happening on other blockchains? Or do you think that users will have their funds on maybe a handful of chains, maybe that's the other middle option, or that users will have their funds on tons of chains, and just from their perspective, they look at it like it's just one spot? Because I don't have that figured out.
Yeah, I think it's hyper dependent on the type of user that you're talking about. Like the average bridge user is like so in nondescript as to be kind of like meaningless, right? Like there's DAOs who want to do an action across chains. Those are people who like have a home chain for sure. And then there's airdrop hunters who like maybe have a home chain, but it's a brief relationship and they're moving capital pretty quickly. And then you have people who are like more long-term invested in a variety of different ecosystems. So like a Rollup enjoyer, right? And they maybe have a pile of funds on Arbitrum, Optimism, and ZK Sync or whatever. So I think it's really hard to kind of pin down the entire market in that way.
I want to add something to this. I think it also really depends on which kind of tokens or assets we are talking about. And it also depends on if you're a person or an institution, how did you get onboarded in the first place? I think what we're seeing right now is all these big banks trying to get into that reward asset game. And for them, they're going to launch their permission chains just to make sure that they are compliant with whatever they start with. So I think there will be a natural very organic way how things remain fragmented for a very long time, and then you have like an optimal state against economic interests and control, because that won't go away, right? You want to keep like there will be a time where then people want to keep assets on their chain where they can then make money through transaction costs and whatever. Like I think fragmentation is just a very natural interest, which we have seen in Web 2.0. Like everyone wants to keep the user data for themselves and so on. And in the future, people are gonna they will want to have want to keep transactions for themselves. If I onboard one of my existing consumers, I want to keep transactions where I have control about, where I can monetize this and partake in any economic value exchange.
Yeah, and Philip, I actually think that plays well into like the kind of the bank analogy, right? Like banks don't want your money at other banks. They very much want your money at their bank, right? And they fight tooth and nail to get your funds on their bank. And that to me further like does very lay out clearly where I think the fragmentation will lie. Like you're once you bring in JP Morgan chain or like BlackRock chain, this is very clear. Like BlackRock wants all your money, as much of your share of wallet as they can on their chain. And it does seem to me that all the kind of like being closest to the user here, it devolves into having the most of the user's money. And there's a natural fragmentation that happens there.
However, your question again was multi-layered, right? Because there is one thing to question: will we have assets distributed across multiple chains as an individual, and or do we actually have to move these assets across chain, or will a zero knowledge proof be enough? Will we have a standard where I can prove I have my reward assets on my permissioned JP Morgan bank? I want to use it as a collateral at my Goldman Sachs on the Goldman Sachs chain to take out a loan and finance another business, whatever, right? So again, like two questions. Like I would separate the discussion. So will we move? So the question might maybe rephrase to: will we move assets across chain as you talk about interoperability, or will we have a future where all we need is multi-chain awareness of which assets I own at which places, and then all I need is a zero knowledge proof to interact with different protocols and the assets I have?
I think it also depends on if you see an asset as potentially having multiple homes as a chain and truly traveling between them, or if really all we're doing is minting debt tokens on other chains. And if an asset really only has one canonical home where it sits in a vault, and these debt tokens during hacks get unbacked. I think right now there's really only one asset that has multiple canonical homes, right? And that's USDC, which is minted and burned by Circle. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, almost every other asset, we're technically just minting debt tokens, which is very similar to just doing a zero knowledge proof and proving that you have control over an original asset on Ethereum, for example.
Yeah, so I think part of it is market structure too, right? Because right now the mode of interaction, like the reason that we have those debt tokens is because the way most systems are architected on the other side, they need to accept something that looks generally like an ERC token. That's where that thing fits. And so I'm inclined to think, now Hart, you got me with this mind virus of the bank thing. So most of us probably have one bank account. If you look at like classes of individuals by wealth, there's probably some like correlation between increasing wealth and an increasing number of accounts. And if there is a technical requirement really for, if we want to interact with, say, an app that's on a distant chain, if it is expecting to receive something that looks like an ERC, just call it some token, versus looking to receive like a data point, then that's going to have to be transferred. So if we want to have this model where like I can have one account on one chain and then have things kind of be routed for me, who is the actor in the middle? Who is like the market maker, so to speak, or who is the Connext in this example that then allows me to move the liquidity around? So like I would say in this more crypto native market structure, it feels like across Connext, you guys play an enabling role in me being able to keep all my funds in one bank on one chain, and then being able to tap things on demand, and not have to store not to have multiple bank accounts just because I want to transact with people who are, customers of those other banks. It's like, what's the exchange layer? What's the market maker? How do things move around? And crypto market structure is developing in a pretty interesting way relative to this.
Well, John, maybe the right way is to sort of bifurcate it, where maybe what you have is let's make it kind of like today's world. So you're right, most people have one bank account, but then people also have their retirement account for their investment funds, and maybe they have their Robinhood account. And so you have a few accounts that have your financial assets that are meant to be your savings and investment stuff. And so that makes sense that money's fragmented, and those financial companies are competing to have as much of your assets as they can on their platform, right? Well, platform equals chain here. But then if we play crypto forward and we're saying, okay, we're going to use crypto for micropayments to pay for all these other services, and you have your YouTube subscription, and you have your New York Times account, and you have whatever else, you don't want to put money there. You just want to be able to pay for the thing you have access to. Right. And so maybe the right bifurcation is there's going to be financial applications and financial chains that are very much competing to have big store of your actual assets on them. And then separately, you're going to have your Venmo chain that is your little account that you make micropayments to all these other services, like your crypto game. Maybe there's I like the example of Poker Chain. On Poker Chain, I don't really want to send a bunch of money to Poker Chain. I just want to send money from my Venmo account quickly and click a button, and I made my bet and I anteed up and I played my hand and all that. And maybe that's the right bifurcation, where there's going to be this long tail of kind of consumery applications that don't require my money to live there. They live somewhere else. And there's financial chains that really want huge chunks of my wallet.
Yeah, but then how do those apps get your money when it's time? I view that as something like Connext, something like Across is playing the role of making that transfer, because at the end of the day, they're going to need, somebody's going to come collect. And so when it's time to make those collections, I don't want to have, the same way, I don't have a deposit account with Amazon when I go buy something. I don't want to keep a balance of Bezos bucks. I just want them to charge. And so Visa network basically plays in this existing e-commerce market structure. Visa is basically the thing that takes stuff from my bank account to the merchant. If the merchant in this case is any of these apps that we're talking about, right, like Poker Chain, and the bank, let's say, is Ethereum, something like a Connext or Across plays that Visa role, maybe in conjunction with something like a Hyperlane, an XLR, Union, whatever it is. Right? Something has to be in the middle so that at the end of the day, merchant or Poker Chain can pay the bills.
Yeah, I agree. There's an intent layer that's fast bill, that's connects and across, right? You knew it was coming, right?
Intent layers, the new debit cards.
There you go. It's just as catchy too. It's oh man, where's my intent card? My intent card. I got it.
But there is something that's enabling a sub 200 millisecond cheap payment for all of these little things that lets you get to other blockchains. There has to be. So yeah. End of podcast. Right.
Yeah.
I also think this is the one thing we have learned in e-commerce was the faster and shorter I can make the payment process, the more people are going to spend. And that goes end to end, right? Amazon heavily increased their revenue just by reducing the page load time. And it goes down to the one-click purchase ability, to anything we can do to reduce the amount of information I have to put into a payment process, the waiting time between adding my information and actually having the payment process. All of that impacts how much I'm going to spend that very much day. And it has to come down to at least what we have in Web 2.0, if not even faster. And we shouldn't forget, like, Web 2.0 is improving while we are building this. I read a tweet yesterday which said, we are in the floppy disk era of blockchain. I kind of found that accurate. 10 more years.
Yeah. Definitely like the actual floppy one before they actually had the hard plastic cover.
John, no one listening knows the actual 5 1/4-inch floppy.
You know what it is.
I know, but no one else here knows.
There
They
you
only
go.
know the 3.5-inch hard plastic, right?
It's like the first time in 5 years I felt young in crypto.
You about too. So if we agree that there's at least a long tail of applications that we want to click a button and have an action on another blockchain happen like quickly and seamlessly, I think the general architecture for what that looks like has like 3 layers. It has the order flow, so the user generates their order, which is the intent of what they want to do on the other blockchain, and that costs some money. That money could just be gas fees, or it could be gas fees plus my bet on poker chain and like some information. So there's an intent here, and that probably gets auctioned off. I think there's like some sort of auction where people compete to fill that intent. And then there's a middle layer that I'm going to call the solver layer, solver, relayer, filler, market maker, whatever you want to call it. But it's the off-chain actor that goes and fulfills that intent. And in my world, they actually fulfill it with their own capital, which is how it gets to be fast and cheap. And Lane, I think you guys roughly agree. And then there's the bottom layer that I'm going to call the settlement layer, which is where user funds are actually escrowed, and they're released to the solver after we verify that intent was fulfilled. And so I think establishing a standard by which solvers can all compete to fill these intents is kind of like it's a positive sum outcome where we can kind of align the whole crypto ecosystem around a common way of specifying this user order, user intent, user action thing, such that we have maximum competition to fulfill it quickly.
Right, like a shared indexing layer for solvers to compete on.
Yeah.
I actually don't think, I think that's important, but I think that's important for like me and you. I don't know if that's so much important for the consumers and like what interop should feel like. And I actually think one of the areas that is going to be really important to kind of have seamless handling is kind of more on the execution layer and how to handle errors. And that's where I think we have like a lot of differences across all of the different stacks, across all of the different applications that, and like until we kind of get more consolidated on what that feels like, people just won't always feel comfortable using interoperability solutions.
Yeah, I personally think actually error handling is part of the security story as well. I would say opinion is if a protocol can't refund in case of no execution and has to rely on like an off-chain party to do that refund, then you haven't really done true trustless interop. So even that portion of the stack needs to be kind of folded in and communicated backwards automatically somehow. For me, at least, I think it's going to divide very much into light line-based bridging or hard intent. I think kind of everything in between, for me as a developer, doesn't have very strong guarantees. There's lots of overhead to think about these edge cases. What will the protocol do? Like intents, because everything is out of protocol basically, right? Like the market maker, the solver fulfills. That's the guarantee that you get as a user. Or fully trustless, it's all in smart contract. All of the edge cases are handled. Only kind of the pure rigorous correctness is going to fulfill it. But something in between, where for part of the protocol you still need to rely on an oracle or a multi-sig, that never made a lot of sense to me. If you want to abstract and generalize a lot.
Jared, you touched base on a very important topic here, which for for companies, for clients of all of ours is important. It's like the monitoring of transactions and debuggability and the ability to provide transparency to their end consumers, right? Like, why are things stuck? Especially if you think about bridging, that it often involves two transactions, one on the source chain, one on the destination chain. These things just make it hard for anyone. And so you do not only end up integrating multiple solutions, you also have to build like a debugging and monitoring system around all of that. This is kind of what we are focusing with Leafhead. This is like one of the major pains people don't see in the first place. Just once they've started implementing multiple solutions, they're like, oh shit, our customer support has a big problem here, because you cannot neglect customer support. You cannot neglect providing transparency to the user. Where are my funds? All right. So yeah, very important topic you touch base on, and often we don't talk enough about that. So I'm also advocating for, we need to talk about meta standards, like standards on error codes, standards on, like we have that for the web, right? Like we need standards around communication from a technical perspective. This is really something we should all sit together and think about. What are the different edge cases we have, and can we agree on a standardized on a standardized approach on how to treat certain errors?
Yeah, and I think really what you're talking about, Phil, is observability, right? Like, I want to know what's going on in the period between I click this button and then the thing that I wanted to happen happens. And it's very unnerving. It really, like, it has nothing to do just with crypto, right? Like, what's Domino's is probably like biggest success of the last 10 years. The order tracker, it's not even real. It's not actually monitoring the delivery guy, but people love thinking that it does, and it gives you a lot of comfort. And so there's two ways to get around this and give people that additional comfort. One is to just actually have like better observability and monitoring, such that, hey, when I click that button, something pops back, and I have a sense of, pretty much every interoperability protocol involves an off-chain component. What's happening while that off-chain component is in play? What's happened after my transaction got included on the block, the next block of the first chain, in between then and it being included on the destination? The other thing you can actually do, which is a lever that not enough people think about, is like, the more you reduce that time, the less there is a chance for something to go wrong. So if an 8 to 10 second window that they're waiting, it's not even enough time for anxiety to develop. Make that window 35 minutes, 40 minutes. Now people start freaking out, and we have firsthand experience about it, because you see it you see people's what Phil mentioned about like customer support. No one's asking like, where's my transaction, when it's taking 30 seconds, when it's taking 10 seconds. You're getting just not enough time. Turn that time up to 20 minutes. They have a whole lot more questions. And so far as Lane's saying, like, hey, the user experience is really what's going to matter. This is, I think, like one of the biggest determinants on user experience, is like knowing what the hell is going on.
Reminds me of a monetization strategy for bridges, which is to show ads while the tokens are getting sent from one place to another, which actually could reduce the anxiety that users feel if they're watching a video or a commercial as they're
You have to weigh it against that, and like everybody's Insta spam filter is like, oh shit, what did I just connect my MetaMask to?
No, you're thinking too small. Let's make long optimistic transfers, partnerships with streaming services, and now it's like, oh, how long does this take? This is just enough time for episode 6 of True Detective Night Country. Hell yeah. This is
Robbie's just trolling us. He's just trolling us. I love this.
Or giving us indispensable strategy nuggets, and
Robbie, if we manage to get Farcaster frames into this somehow during the ads, then we can start raising right now for this. Like, we could close the end of the week.
Yeah, how can I bridge with a frame and get served an ad inside the same frame? I don't even have to worry about what's happening in my transactions. I'm so distracted by Tide detergent bulbs.
And a little pop-up that lets you order a pizza.
Jumper. Still muted?
Oh, never mind.
No, you're back.
You're good.
Okay, sorry. We were actually exploring ads on Jumper.exchange to pay for transaction costs, and you can opt into that option and consume ads, and we pay for your transaction costs. Like, we got that idea multiple times out of the community, and I bet some people are willing to pay for it and actually watch it. I mean, advertising will be around. It will always be a thing, wherever we go. So it will naturally, organically find its way into crypto as well. Pretty certain.
Yeah, but also
I mean, we joked, but I
have-
actually don't think it's a terrible idea. I think this is a pretty cool. There's something here. Let's have to think about it more.
Crypto ads are just
I'd rather spend that energy though, just making 200 millisecond bridge times.
Right. I was gonna say,
For
or
sure.
we could just make it faster, guys.
Kind of bringing us back to
ZK ASICs.
yeah, I saw something on Farcaster. Some guy was posting ZK6 and then getting hate from the Ethereum community about it because they thought it was about proof of work. But anyhow, that site is has been a lot of fun to explore. Kind of bringing us back to the modular interop conversation. I think one of the big things about this whole modular kind of realm is like build a ton of block space, give apps their ability to have their own execution environments. So kind of a general question is, in a world of ever expanding chains in the immediate term, 1 to 3 years, I know that we touched on a lot of like the longer RWAs and kind of like general user experience, but for the people who are in the community now, you know, people are tired of bridging. People are tired of waiting for having to use different bridges with different liquidity. People want to be able to go on Rabby and go on different apps on different chains across all different execution environments and dozens of chains and be able to just interact freely without the thought of kind of these complexities. So how are you guys looking at abstracting these away in the next couple of years for the current kind of power user community, those who are using DeFi, NFTs on chain, those who are willing to go and explore new chains? And is that any different than the kind of general conversation with regards to kind of mass adoption and greater usage?
Yeah, I have a pretty strong opinion about this, obviously, as like a meta aggregator. By now, we simply say we are a multi-chain trading API because trading can mean lots of things. Swapping assets, moving assets, exchanging assets across multiple chains on the same chain, whatever. And as you said, like it is a big problem for a Robinhood to look at that multi-chain environment and be like, well, we have multiple DEX aggregators. They actually do perform differently depending on chain and trade pair. And then on top of that, you have the solver systems that are even better. Like we have been testing this. We have been implementing solver systems recently, like Propeller heads and more advanced DEX aggregators like Odos, that they have more complex strategies. And they are outcompeting 1inch, which like a year ago was supposed to be still like the best, and they are getting serious competition from solver systems and more modern DEX aggregators. We also see, again, like we just saw Floor being funded, like a new DEX aggregator getting funded in this environment, right? Also a year ago, I thought like we are kind of done with the bridging stuff, hopefully. In the past 2-3 months, at least 3-4 different new models on bridges. I mean, people are reaching out to us very often, like quite early, right? Like we like Lefi has a decent amount of distribution power by now, based on we have over 200 B2B integrations, and more and more enterprise ones by now. So we get these people very early on knocking at our door. Hey, integrate us. We are going to go live then and then, right? So I'm surprised how much more innovation there is actually, things we haven't thought about, really. So there's more to come, and someone has to aggregate all of that and abstract it away. We have been focusing on solely that. We won't build our own infrastructure piece in the next 10 years. So we will just keep on simplifying crypto adoption. And there's no way around. Like with rollups as a service and all these new L2s coming up, and even with new R&D that has to be productized in form of chains like Aptos to ESI, right? If we invest into research, it has to be productized at some point. And this creates economic incentives to simply spin up the next L1. And it's good because that innovation should not stop. But again, it creates a problem for crypto adoption. And we really focus on paving the way for mass adoption from a B2B perspective. And this will ultimately drive millions of consumers into this space.
Yeah, I think you have the realists approach. There's 100 competing protocols, and you guys have the shit job of needing to aggregate and support all of them. And I think John and I kind of have the idealist approach, where we want to see a future where at the lowest layer there is actually just one protocol, very like engineering approach, where if we get that level of purity, that's almost the dream, right? Where there is like one standard to kind of rule them all as the base layer itself. I think, Andy, that's still like a couple of years away, and it's going to be a bit of a fight between the different interop standards out there. But hopefully, at least for me as a dev, like that would be kind of the unlock for the like 1,000 app chain, 10,000 app specific L2 thesis.
Carol, do you think
actually,
this will be resolved by establishing a standard? Sorry. Do you think this is going to be established by a standard by an ERC, by EIP, or do you think it's going to be one winner takes it all?
I think it's going to be everyone slowly working together to reach the same standards. I think most interop like either intents or it's going to be light client based. And so there you already go to a certain standard. Once you have light client based, you could do header aggregation or just have the same circuits. And so you all arrive on kind of the same view of the different chains. The next logical step then is just API compatibility, right? Like if we already talk about exactly the same data, we do some type of storage, Merkle inclusion proof under the hood, then let's just all settle on the exact same interface to do these operations. And I think like as certain protocols will grow, like we're gonna basically be pushed by guys like you to settle on a certain standard, or hopefully get a bit of like a grassroots movement. I think with the internet as well, you saw like large internet firms try to set certain standards, and in the end, what won out were kind of the protocols designed by the devs in their attic, hacking around on Nix and such. I think Interop is going to go the same route.
Carol,
yeah,
I think
what I will say is, where I actually disagree a little bit is I don't think, it would be nice to have one thing like at the lowest layer, but I think crypto is different. I think it's different than how just other technology forms and really just other markets have evolved, because there's this like filial affiliation that people feel with the systems that they use, because for the first time there is something that might dictate someone's decision to use something or even change how they feel about something that is completely irrespective of the underlying technology. And that is genuinely not the case in most, like people's usage of, say, like TCP/IP probably was less influenced by factors like this, maybe other human factors, because obviously there's still like human in the loop. And so that's why I think like we're probably, Ethereum is not going to be like the sole settlement layer that matters. There's not going to be, like one, say, shared sequencer that matters. I think you have kind of a proliferation of standards and approaches just because of the way these systems work and their incorporation of what ultimately is an asset with like financial characteristics that's involved in the mix. And so now people like want to get that, they get that, then that becomes part of how they operate their own business. And that kind of throws a monkey wrench into it. And why I could see, something that really should have a winner take all dynamic being several winners take most kind of dynamic, as people's like, well, you know what, maybe we weren't going to use Axelar, but actually like through our usage of Axelar and like through our partners, like we have this affiliation with the Axel token. And so we've decided to use that at our lowest layer. And I think that's actually a huge benefit for folks like Phil.
I have a question for you guys, especially Jay, Lane, Hart. While you are shaping a product roadmap, have you ever engaged with CASA, like chain agnostic improvement, chain agnostic standard alliance, and the standards they're trying to establish, especially driven by Pedro from Modular Connect, for example? But are you aware, and do you align with any of that?
Yeah, definitely aware of the standards. I think it's like a difficult trade-off because any standard needs kind of like a jumpstart in adoption before it can really like be a viable option. So a lot of the, you know, a lot of the messaging layers right now don't adopt it, which makes it difficult for us to work with, and I'm sure for you to work with. But I think that it's a really great organization, and we probably should invest more there as we go forward with different implementations.
But why do you need anyone else to adopt the standard in order for you to adopt the standard? You actually don't, right?
Because then what's the point of the standard? If it's just one person who does it, why don't I just do it the way that works best with my databases?
So
I mean,
like I want to kind of separate two things, because I really do think there's two things going on here. There is like, how do you send messages between blockchains? And that I kind of am with John. I think there's going to be a few winners there. There's going to be a few ways that you can do that. And establishing standards there is hard because you have so many people competing for how you should send messages between blockchains. But then if we believe that users want really fast transactions, I'm going to go back to my intent thing. This intent thing where users get filled without a message getting sent that's like a pretty major advantage. That's a pretty major speed advantage. And so now if you think, okay, if users want that, what you're establishing as a standard for intents now looks more like just specifying an order ticket. It's a pretty kind of obvious thing that I think developers are going to end up demanding, because developers are going to be like, look, I don't want to like, I just literally want to say, here's my action: tokens in, tokens out, tokens in on chain A, tokens out on chain B, and execution of this transaction. Go, right? It's a pretty obvious kind of thing that they want to have create. And then if this order ticket becomes standardized, and it might even become loosely done by there just being a killer app that kind of uses this and everybody else starts adopting it, then like Philip, like what you said, you just have this solver infrastructure that's just competing to fill this really simple order as efficiently as possible. And then underneath that, the solvers are filling out how to verify their intent using these different message passing systems. But like they can get much more sophisticated about which messaging system they use. But I go back and be like, if you want a developer to build an application easily on their new rollup chain, they need an easy way of getting people to quickly interact with it from other chains. And they don't have to even think about all this other shit. And I don't know, that's kind of where my mind goes.
I think one counter argument against that is, in a world where all chains have single slot finality, a solver observes the order just as quickly as that it can be settled with a proof on other chains. So if you think like 5-10 years in the future with ZK, ASICs and such, really like there is no advantage on doing it just purely over intents. And then you also don't need to have the liquidity available as a solver, right? So then you're in a fully proof-based world where you can just mint it immediately. I think before Ethereum has single slot finality, like 5 to 10 years is a optimistic time estimate.
Yeah, Carol, why don't we go into that just so like the audience understands what you mean better? Because I actually agree with you. So yeah. What you're saying, let me try and you can tell me if I got it right. But you're saying, okay, if we have like very quick finality, single slot, we'll call it immediate. I'm going to call it immediate finality. And we also have really cheap ZK proof generation. It doesn't cost much at all to make a ZK proof. Then all I can do is like, I do an action on one chain, generate the ZK proof that happened, take it to another chain, verify that ZK proof almost immediately. That happens in close to real time. And I have no need for a solver to front capital or anything like that. And it all works. Do you agree with that? Is that what you're
exactly? Yeah, that's the dream system at least, right? Like that I think you couldn't outcompete such a system.
Yeah, and I also think that I actually tend to believe that will be possible, but it's premised on single slot finality, like very quick finality times, and very, very cheap ZK proof generation.
Yeah.
And just so like the audience understands why we can't do that today is ZK proofs are not that fast, and they're kind of expensive. And then blockchains also aren't that fast. So instead, if you want a fast experience, you've got to like fill the gap. And the way you can fill the gap is you introduce a third-party actor, a solver, relayer, filler, whatever you want to call them, that then goes and fronts money. They take risk. They front the money and fill the user with their own capital. And then we can do the ZK proof generation. And also like what Across does is batch together a bunch of relayer payments to make it cheaper. Then we can do the generation slower and pay back the solvers. So this cross-chain intent thing where you have this third-party actor fronting capital, it's designed to emulate the end state you're talking about, but with like the technologies we have now.
Yeah, exactly. And we're slowly getting there in the ZK space. Like depending on like what consensus you're tracking, it's in the minute range, sub-minute range. For our version, we can do it in 6 seconds, but that has some severe modifications to the consensus. But I'm kind of like bullish on this, especially if we kind of get general ZK ASICs, that actually the proving will be solved before we manage to change the Ethereum protocol to SSO.
The SSL one, the single slot thing, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the problem of database locking in high traffic environments, right? Do you think this is going to be solved in short term? It still is a problem for databases. And when databases, like, you know, single cluster databases, still are still innovating and evolving out that. We have seen more and more new database systems like KeyDB, DragonflyDB, ClickHouse, and so on that they have become faster at taking in like handling concurrency. In the blockchain environment, it's even a bigger problem because like we need a shared state, right? And we need composability, and we need to like. I don't see that being solved in the next 10 years, to be honest. Like we are still struggling on database level.
I mean, it's a slightly different issue. Like Tendermint does it right, has single slot finality. Ethereum offers a much larger validator set than the average Cosmos chain. So like getting a degree that 2/3 has signed it and generating proof of that is a bit more difficult. There's network traffic going on, etc. But I think right now the consensus kind of is that the BLS approach, since the merge, is actually very performant, and that those improvements can actually be added on top. I think there's much nicer guarantees for the end user, right? Like no more block reorgs happening. Once a transaction gets in, you just know it succeeded, which I think for everyone is an amazing property to have for your products.
But it will add delays, right? Like on high traffic, it would like. Is there more information about that? I haven't managed to look it up yet. But so how is?
Yeah, there's currently one downside to it. Right now, Ethereum can stop finalizing, but still proceed with execution. So even though reorgs can happen, if the beacon chase goes down, users still can interact with apps. If you combine the two into SSO, if finalization stops, execution stops. And then you get what you see with Solana, that just like it stops working altogether. And so finding a solution that kind of preserves execution continuing is hard.
Thanks.
This is awesome. And it felt like super productive too. Like a lot of times this is just like, we're just like, I don't know, kind of shit posting and trolling around in these live streams, but this actually felt like a working group of sorts. So
Rob is trolling you guys so hard today.
I'm saying this felt productive. Anyway, I think we have some people that have a hard stop at the top of the hour, which is 4 minutes. So we'll just kind of go around the horn and everyone can give some closing thoughts and then we'll wrap it up. Kaiser, Carol, you want to start?
Very productive, guys. I didn't meet some of you before, so very happy with this. For me, Art, the future is like provable, and we're going to get to this like perfect end state where everything finalizes in 100 milliseconds, and we can prove it in a millisecond. That to me is what I want to see and what the dream is for crypto.
And do it cheaply.
And cheaply, yeah.
Yeah, fingers crossed. But you know, I'll just end with one of my dad's phrases. Like, you know, everybody's dad has a few phrases, but his timing isn't an important thing. It's the only thing. So we'll kind of see how the proving lines up. But as fast as crypto moves, some of those things end up taking longer than I expect.
Yeah, look, it's gonna be a fun ride, but I think we'll see you all in Valhalla. Is the way I like to think about it. Like,
Yeah, I guess, Carol, what I'll add is like I am spending more and more time thinking about how fundamental ZK, the succinctness property of ZKs, is to being this glue for interop, like being able to prove the state in linear time of another blockchain is a wild way to connect these disparate systems. And like that really wasn't a concept that anybody thought was possible 3 years ago at all. And so I think that there is a lot of reason to be really excited about like the ZK stuff. However, I really do think we got to solve the thing now, and we can get really good and really efficient by learning a lot from the types of like highly competitive architectures we see in like HFT space, where you really can have off-chain actors competing to fill users with their balance sheet very effectively. And we're calling this cross-chain intense. So yeah, I'm not against your future. I like it, but I think we gotta, like Lane said, we gotta solve it for now. So yeah. I'm an intense maximalist in the short term.
I mean, we believe that consolidation in form of standardization or a fixed oligopoly and all of that will take much more time than we expect. We seen there's just too much innovation on all these layers and levels, and many of them will get a decent amount of market share and are well funded. So it will take longer than expected. But yeah, like at LeFi, we are watching all of you, and we're super excited about it. Like we're taking a deep look into all of these things, writing down our thoughts. We're going to continue writing deep dives and comparison frameworks and all of that. So it's very exciting. It's like a bottomless pit. It's just so much happening. It's incredible, but very excited about this. Very excited.
Yep.
Guys,
Again,
it was a
guys,
pleasure.
thank you.
Thanks for hosting
Yeah,
us.
thank you for coming on. If you guys got to go, feel free to go. Rob and I are going to stay on for a little longer. Thank you, everybody, for coming on and for accepting the trolls.
Yeah, Andy, you and Rob are just going to sit around and troll us for a bit now?
We're just going
it's the after
we're
show.
just going to sit around and chat.
This is news.
Yeah.
So feel free to stay on if you like, but if you got to go, no worries. Just need a little recap and summary. Very exciting stuff. Very much glad that we were able to kind of push this forward-looking approach, you know, and kind of inspire some future collaborations. Hopefully, I think Hart, a lot of stuff that you're saying solves kind of like the here and now, and then somewhat challenged by Carell's longer-term kind of thought process. All in then Carell's takes about kind of one system, one ZK, this pure kind of system, and then J. Cole's like, well, no, we have all these different incentive mechanisms, right? There's going to be a kind of a host of options, and so kind of putting these pieces together for us degen, us happily 50 transactions per day on chain users, we are quite happy to see the interoperability solutions be built from the ground up.
Appreciate you guys having us. It's been great. Super fun.
Thanks, Art.
Thanks so
for
much.
having us.
Thanks,
Take
everyone.
care.
See you guys.
Denver.
Bye-bye.